Well, topping the news this hour, it's a scene millions around the world watched unfold. A moment in history captured on cell phone cameras and through the eyewitness accounts seen on Twitter. For many, the Arab Spring was a total upset of the past decade's policies in the Middle East. Government officials looked at the protests with an air of skepticism, many others with a glimmer of hope for what peaceful rallies can accomplish. We watched as the protests flared up, toppled governments, and then died down. But now, in light of an anti-Muslim film titled The Innocence of Muslims, dozens of protests have broken out across the region. This time, the unrest isn't focused on each individual country's government, but against the U.S. Now, here's a map highlighting some of the regions that we know of that are experiencing these protests: Gaza City, Tripoli, Cairo, Benghazi, Bangladesh, Baghdad, Jerusalem, Sana'a, Islamabad, Tehran, Kabul, and Jalalabad, and that's just to name a few. Now, as we watch this situation develop, there are still many questions we simply don't have the answer to. There's also the question of the bigger picture, what these protests mean for the geopolitical landscape, and more specifically for the U.S. So, for more on the unrest, I'm joined now by Ibrahim Khattabi, spokesperson for the Yemeni American Coalition for Change. Ibrahim, thank you so much for joining me. So, a lot to talk about here, but first I want to ask you about the instability of the region. Is it really that big of a surprise?
Well, what do you see in the region in the past few days is unacceptable. Basically, the break into the U.S. embassies in the region. However, I think it's a clear indication of anger toward the American government policies in the region, which many of them hasn't changed and still the same. And so we need some sort of new policies in the region, particularly in places like Yemen and Syria and Egypt and elsewhere.
And Ibrahim, I actually watched the 13-minute film trailer myself to prepare for the interviews today. And I must say that it actually looked like something out of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I mean, it was poorly made, poorly edited, almost silly with its ridiculousness. And yes, it was offensive. But does this movie merit the attention it's been given in the region and the lives that it's actually costing those people in the Middle East?
Well, when it comes to religion, I think a lot of Muslims are very emotional, especially when their prophet is being attacked. But personally, I don't think it is just the film. I'm a Yemeni American, and when you go to Yemen and talk to many people in Yemen, and even when you chat with them in the social media, many Yemenis, for example, think that the U.S. ambassador in Yemen actually running the country. And only dealing with the same old politics, with the same regime, not supporting the people, not supporting those who went to the streets to actually demand justice, accountability, jobs, equal citizenship. And so basically, the U.S. can do so much in the region. The U.S. can enter into a mutual sort of respect and a mutual interest where they can achieve their interests, and also where the people of the region can benefit from it as well. But clearly in Yemen, where the drone strikes are still taking place, the Saleh regime is still in power. And the movement that actually started, like the most peaceful Yemeni revolution, did not get enough support from the U.S. government. When they designed the GCC deal that was backed by the U.S., basically they completely excluded the youth and the civil society from it. So basically, there is a lot to be done here, and a lot that the U.S. needs to be taken into consideration. We can't just
keep... And Ibrahim, we have seen a lot of those protests happen in Yemen. I mean, right now we're also seeing a ramp up of the drone strikes there. That's something that RT has been covering extensively. Now, when the vice president took over in Yemen, those drone strikes increased. So why aren't people taking this sentiment and taking a movie to express this sentiment against the U.S.? Should they also be expressing this sentiment against the Yemeni government?
Well, basically, there's a lot of anger toward the Yemeni government and also the U.S. government among a lot of movements in the country, but not a violent, anger toward the U.S. If you look at the pictures that were taken when they breached into the U.S. embassy in Sana'a, it's only a handful of people. It goes over 200 individuals, and the vast majority of Yemenis actually against violence. You can see that through their peaceful revolution, where millions of Yemenis took the streets and didn't even fire back at the government that actually murdered over 1,200 peaceful protesters and wounded over 29,000 people. So the bottom line here, and let me be clear, Yemen is a country that has more than 60 million pieces of weapons. Each family or each household has at least 3 weapons. They decided not to do anything violent. And this, when they took it to the streets, they never used the weapons. They could have thrown their governments overnight. They don't want to do that. They want jobs, they want education, they want to live peacefully. And these are the things that the U.S. government should be looking into and helping the Yemenis abroad. We need some sort of, educational exchange program. We need some sort of support where they support the civil society, support the youth movements, and these are things that we need to look into.
Ibrahim, are you saying that you think the U.S. should be getting more involved in the region?
Say that again?
Are you expressing that you think that the U.S. should get more involved in the region?
Well, I'm not expressing they need to get more involved in the region. What I'm expressing is that they need to correct their foreign policy in the region. Which is by providing support and respecting the people's wishes and demands. And Yemen, so far, a president, a former dictator who was supported by the U.S. is still at large in Yemen. Who killed many peaceful protesters in Yemen, is still now own a TV station. And the people are seeing, Saleh and his family as allies, and Saleh's family, for example, his son is still the head of the Republican Guards, and a lot of people say if it wasn't for the U.S., then they wouldn't be in the country. They would have been either prosecuted and behind bars.
Well, and I also know that some of this rhetoric, some of this hatred is not only being expressed to the U.S. There are also attacks going on in the embassies of the U.K. and also of Germany. Can you talk about this maybe it's not necessarily an anti-American sentiment, but an anti-Western sentiment?
Look, I'm focused more on Yemen, and I really can't speak about what's going on in London because I haven't even looked into that. But I think I'm against any kind of violence, and I don't think this, expressing anger toward anything, especially when we're talking about the freedom of speech, should not be done this way. But there's a lot of things behind this. Basically, there is an anger and a built of anger for decades now, especially during the revolution. A lot of people in the region were looking at the U.S. to actually stand by their demands. However, there's also Islamophobic in the U.S., and these things that we need to look at them seriously. That kind of extremism, whether it's in the U.S. or abroad, needs to be addressed. We need some sort of dialogue. We need some sort of and these organizations that are actually spreading anti-Islamophobic or even anti-Americans or any sort of that extremism need to be really addressed. So we can't just talk about any sort of violence overseas when we know that many.
All right, Ibrahim, I'm going to have to cut it off there. Thank you so much for your opinions. I'm sure we'll have to follow up on you and follow this developments as they unfold. Ibrahim Khattabi, spokesperson for the Yemen American Coalition for Change.
Thanks for having me.